Have you ever witnessed someone who doesn't need to raise their voice to command a room? Someone whose silence rearranges the air like a shift in gravity? They don't demand. They don't explain. They simply become unavailable. And everything begins to tremble in their absence. The dynamics shift. People who once took them for granted begin to feel unsettled. They start to reach, to chase, to question. Not because words were spoken, but because energy was reclaimed. Now imagine for a moment if that person were you. Imagine no longer reacting instantly to every pull on your emotional strings. Imagine choosing to pause instead of explain, to retreat instead of erupt. What would happen if, instead of being the open channel for everyone else's storms, you became the stillness they could no longer reach? This is the threshold of transformation, the place Carl Jung called the beginning of individuation. You see, when you stop being endlessly accessible, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, the entire system you once kept alive with your availability begins to unravel. Those who relied on your predictability begin to feel the vacuum your silence creates. Why? Because they were never relating to you, they were relating to your reactions. And when those reactions disappear, so does their control. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." But the reverse is also true. Everything that irritates others about your boundaries reveals what they were benefiting from without your consent. Their agitation is not a reflection of your absence. It's a mirror of their dependence on your emotional availability. When you begin to observe who gets uncomfortable with your silence, who tries to provoke you just to feel a flicker of your old self re-emerge, you start to see the deeper game at play. You begin to understand how many of your yeses were not acts of love, but survival. How many of your immediate replies were not connection, but fear of losing people who were never truly present with you to begin with. With every automatic agreement, every quick emotional response, you were bleeding energy into relationships that did not nourish you. And what was left in return? A tired body, a restless mind, and an invisible ache that no amount of effort seemed to heal. But here's the truth that Jung understood and the world often forgets. Silence is not weakness. It is the sacred language of self-restoration. Withdrawal, when born from awareness, not avoidance, is power in its purest form. This is not about rejecting the world. It is about returning to yourself. It is about learning the art of conscious distance, the kind that doesn't punish but protects. So, I ask you, not rhetorically but intimately, how long will you allow your nervous system to be dictated by the chaos of others? How many more moments will you give to those who never learned to value your presence? Maybe it's time to step back, to become the unanswered question, to cut the strings of emotional puppetry and become what you were always meant to be, not reactive, but radiant. Because when you stop being available to the wrong energy, everything doesn't just change, it realigns. You were never truly taught boundaries, you were taught performance. From the earliest moments of your life, you were trained, quietly, subtly, but relentlessly, to be available, to say yes with a smile when your soul was whispering no, to answer quickly so no one would question your worth, to be agreeable, present, and useful because your value was never spoken of as inherent. It was always measured in how much of yourself you could give away without resistance. And somewhere along the way, this became your emotional currency. But here lies a truth that society rarely dares to say aloud. This constant availability is not compassion. It is captivity dressed as virtue. And the longer you wear this disguise, the more invisible you become to yourself. You are not being helpful, you are being hollowed out. Because when you're always emotionally accessible, when you're predictable in your giving, automatic in your replies, and reflexive in your care, you become less a person and more a pattern. A button others press for comfort, validation, distraction, a placeholder in someone else's play. And just like that, your sacred presence is reduced to a convenience. You may not even notice it at first because the script was written so long ago. Be nice, be needed, be available. But beneath that script is a silence, a gnawing emptiness that no amount of external approval can ever fill. And this is the soul's quiet rebellion, the realization that availability is not the same as love. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. But what happens when the mask becomes so tight that it strangles the self underneath? When your smile is a performance, your kindness a transaction, your presence a survival mechanism, you begin to disappear from your own life. You apologize for resting. You explain your silence. You rush to respond even when you're drowning. And all of this is done not out of joy, but out of fear, fear of being misunderstood, unloved, rejected. Yet every time you perform like this, you abandon yourself. Not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly. And the body remembers. It remembers through exhaustion. The soul remembers through resentment. You feel drained, not because you give too much, but because you give from emptiness, not wholeness. Being endlessly available is not a virtue. It is a slow self-erasure. It is the sacrifice of your inner world at the altar of external harmony. But harmony built on your silence is not peace. It is emotional servitude. And people who demand your constant availability are not asking for connection. They are asking for access to your time, to your energy, to your emotional labor. They do not want you. They want what you provide. And the moment you shift, the moment you say no, the moment you stop playing the predictable role, they become uncomfortable. They accuse you of changing. But it is not change that unsettles them. It is your refusal to be functional. Your refusal to bleed on command. And here is the most painful paradox. The more available you are, the less value you hold in the eyes of others. Because what is too easily accessed is rarely respected. What is always present becomes background noise. Familiarity breeds not just contempt, but entitlement. So pause for a moment. Reflect. Who truly honors your energy? Who shows up for you without needing a piece of you in return? And more importantly, who becomes agitated when you choose to protect your peace? These are not small questions. They are the very threshold of your awakening. But to cross that threshold, you must ask, why do I keep reacting? Why do I feel the urge to respond, explain, prove, and please? What phantom in my psyche whispers that silence makes me less worthy? This is where we enter Jung's terrain of psychic energy. For what you give away each day is not just time. It is a life force. It is your essence. And if you don't learn to guard it, someone will always find a way to consume it. Carl Jung never saw the human psyche as something mechanical, reacting without consequence to the world's demands. He understood the soul as a subtle and intricate system of psychic energy, one that is not infinite, but sacred. In his view, every thought we generate, every emotion we feel, and every action we take is a withdrawal from this inner reservoir. The tragedy of modern life is not that we are powerless, but that we have become careless with this power. The real question is not whether you are tired, but whether you are unconsciously giving away your vitality to things that deplete you. Are you truly choosing where your energy flows? Or have you become a puppet of the external world's noise and triggers? Every time you react impulsively, you forfeit your sacred fuel. When you reply to a comment that never deserved your attention, when you defend yourself against someone who was never seeking truth but only control, when you stay in draining conversations to be liked, when you argue to be right instead of at peace, you are burning your energy in a fire that only leaves you more hollow. Jung reminded us that what we resist does not dissolve. It embeds itself deeper. The more we react, the more tangled we become in the very web we wish to escape. And this is not a weakness. It is misalignment. People who feel perpetually exhausted are not broken. They are leaking energy into battles that were never theirs to fight. And when a soul lives in this constant state of depletion, it becomes porous. That's when emotionally manipulative people can sense your openness, not as something beautiful, but as something exploitable. They pick up on your tendency to respond to everything, your need to explain yourself, and your inability to detach. They see your energy as available currency, and they spend it like it's theirs. Jung believed that a strong psyche does not bleed into everything it sees. It knows how to hold tension. It knows when to engage and when to remain silent. It understands that sometimes stillness is not passivity, but sovereignty. To guard your psychic energy is to reclaim your dignity. It is to say no without shame. It is to sit in silence without interpreting it as defeat. It is to allow misunderstandings to remain unresolved if resolving them costs your peace. And this can only happen when you begin the courageous journey inward, when you start noticing what triggers you, what unroots you, what pulls you away from yourself. How many nights have you lost reliving an interaction? How many mornings have you woken up heavy with conversations you never had or wish you had handled differently? That is not reflection. That is energetic bondage. You are animating ghosts that no longer exist outside of your own emotional field. You are pouring life into dead dynamics, hoping they will resurrect into something more meaningful. But psychic energy, when retained, transforms into presence. It's what allows a person to enter a room without saying a word and still be felt. This kind of presence does not come from speaking louder, working harder, or proving your worth. It comes from mastering the quiet by knowing your triggers and choosing not to respond to every knock at your emotional door. The world respects those who are centered, not those who are constantly available. The more scattered your energy, the less weight your presence carries. Begin watching yourself. What throws you off balance? What words or behaviors cause you to abandon yourself to defend an image? These are not flaws. These are entry points. Each of them is an opportunity to reclaim the energy you've been giving away for years. Not to become cold or uncaring, but to become whole. Because here lies one of Jung's most piercing insights. When you no longer react to others' expectations, you shatter the projections they have placed upon you, and that disruption will not go unnoticed. People may call you strange, difficult, or distant, but in truth, what they're feeling is the loss of control over a version of you they could once manipulate. This is where the shadow reveals itself, not in loud conflicts, but in the silent withdrawal of your energy from places it never belonged. And that is not cruelty, that is clarity, that is healing, that is freedom. There comes a moment in every emotionally exhausted person's life when the mask of civility cracks, and behind it they glimpse something deeply unsettling, the subtle machinery of manipulation that has fed on their availability. Most people never suspect it because it's not loud, it doesn't shout, it smiles, it flatters, it quietly takes. The people who have drained you the most rarely do it with malice. They do it through unspoken contracts you never realized you signed. And here's the terrifying truth. You think your yes is a choice. You think your reaction is willful. But more often than not, It is the predictable echo of a wound you haven't healed. What Jung warned us of was this: we do not simply live, we respond. And if our inner programming remains unconscious, others will learn to press those buttons better than we know how to guard them. The opportunist doesn't need to force you. All they need is access to the versions of yourself you haven't reclaimed. That friend who only shows up in crisis, the partner who feeds on your guilt, the coworker who flatters you into overextending. These are not isolated events. These are patterns, and patterns are invitations for projections to take root. Jung called projection a psychological reflex. It is the process by which others cast their unresolved material onto you. But projection is not a one-way street. It is a mirror hall. The more emotionally porous you are, the more you become a screen upon which others paint their unmet needs, their expectations, their false selves. They aren't relating to your soul. They are relating to the role they need you to play, the savior, the listener, the one who always understands. And what do you receive in return? Praise wrapped in dependency, approval coated in guilt, proximity laced with expectation. Why do you allow it? Why do you remain in dynamics where your soul quietly suffocates? Because part of you still fears being the villain. You fear being called cold, distant, selfish. You fear the emotional exile that follows when you stop performing. And that's how manipulation survives, not through domination, but through suggestion, through the invisible hook of guilt, the whispered obligation to remain available, even when it empties you from the inside out. And here lies the quiet brilliance of reclaiming your energy. The manipulator doesn't need to break you. They just need you to keep behaving the same way. But when you pause, when you withdraw, when your silence replaces your justifications, the entire game collapses. Their illusion disintegrates. The image of you they clung to fades, and with it, the comfort of projection. This unraveling is not pleasant. When you stop showing up in the way they expect, people don't just miss you, they confront themselves. And most are not ready for that encounter. Your emotional unavailability doesn't make you cruel, it makes you reflective. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've stopped leaking energy into a system that only grows stronger the more you weaken. And when you no longer serve as a mirror, they will attack, criticize, question, and accuse. Not because you have harmed them, but because you have stopped being their escape. Jung once wrote, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you remove your presence from their cycle, the shadow rises, raw, unfiltered, and unmasked. But let it rise. And then comes the real test. Are you strong enough to withstand the discomfort of being misunderstood, of being painted as uncaring for choosing yourself? Are you ready for the silence that follows when you stop explaining, stop saving, stop reacting? Because in that silence, something sacred is born. It is the space where you are no longer defined by others' projections, but by your own inner clarity. It is not emptiness, it is sovereignty. And it begins the moment you stop allowing guilt to govern your generosity. There comes a moment on the path of inner evolution when you no longer want to out-argue the world. You simply want peace. And yet, this desire for peace does not come gently. It comes through fire, through exhaustion, through a deep and aching realization that your energy has been scattered across conversations that you never heard, roles that never truly fit, and emotional wars that were never yours to begin with. In a world that praises noise, silence becomes an act of rebellion. And that is where we are going now. Because silence is not weakness, it is psychological strength in its purest, most disarming form. It is not the silence of avoidance, nor the emptiness of retreat. It is the fierce and luminous presence of someone who no longer dances to the rhythms of manipulation and emotional urgency. Jung taught that only in stillness does the unconscious begin to speak, and when it speaks, it doesn't whisper, it reveals. The modern world thrives on stimulation. The faster the message, the louder the voice, the quicker the response, the more valuable it appears. But that value is an illusion. Much of what passes for communication today is nothing more than disguised panic, a desperate attempt to validate the ego, win the argument, control the narrative. We post, react, defend, and explain. But few pause, few listen. Few realize that in always reacting, they are constantly being controlled. When you stop reacting, something sacred begins. You do not disappear. You become a mirror. And in your silence, people are forced to see themselves, not the version you accommodate, but the one your withdrawal uncovers. And that is terrifying to those who relied on your emotional availability to feel superior, stable, or seen. True silence is not the absence of noise, it is the presence of sovereignty. It is the unspoken refusal to expend your life force in proving what you already know. It is the moment when you recognize that some battles only exist because you keep showing up to them. The person who accuses you of being cold when you no longer explain yourself was never listening in the first place. They weren't loving you. They were loving the echo of themselves they projected onto your presence. And your silence? It steals their script. It dissolves the character they cast you to play. And that, more than your words, is what unravels their illusion. Have you noticed the unease when you go silent in a conversation where you used to overfunction? The panic when you don't justify, clarify, or calm things down? That discomfort is not a sign you are wrong. It is a sign you are waking up. Waking up to the cost of emotional exposure. Waking up to the fact that not everyone should have access to your energy. Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming whole, demands space. Space from the personas we perform. Space from the energies that constantly tug at our inner equilibrium. And that space begins in silence. Because when you stop engaging out of guilt or fear, you begin to choose from awareness. You observe rather than absorb. You see the loop instead of becoming it. You no longer try to fix what feeds on your need to fix. You let it fall, and when it does, what's left is clarity. But make no mistake, silence is not a soft path. It is a severance. It will expose those who only valued your words when they could use them. It will reveal who only heard you through the filter of their own expectations. And it will cost you the comfort of being liked, because silence doesn't make you more agreeable. It makes you more authentic. It removes the mask of performative kindness and replaces it with the sacred boundary of energetic discernment. And not everyone will stay when you stop explaining yourself. But those who remain will see you, not as a role, but as a whole, as someone who has walked through the fire of emotional exhaustion and chosen not to burn out, but to burn clean. This is the uncomfortable truth. As you grow, your voice will change. But more importantly, your silence will deepen. You'll speak less, but say more. You'll react less, but see more. You'll explain less, but understand more, because you will no longer trade your inner peace for outer validation. Silence, then, becomes your sanctuary, not because it isolates you, but because it rebuilds you. It is the sacred space between who you were and who you are becoming. And in that space, something profound happens. You no longer chase alignment. You become it. And in the next part, we'll go even deeper. Because once the external noise has been cut, you are left with something more powerful to master, your own energy. It's time to reclaim it, redirect it, and decide what truly deserves to hold it. The world will no longer have your availability by default. It must now earn your presence. Awareness without action is only another illusion of control. Transformation begins not in what you understand, but in what you choose to practice. And the first true practice of power is selectivity. Jung often reminded us that consciousness demands discipline, not sentiment. To be consciously unavailable is not to become cold, arrogant, or detached. It is to reclaim the sacred right to decide where your life energy flows. It is no longer allowed to allow yourself to be reached by everyone, everywhere, for everything. It is to protect the garden of your psyche from being trampled by the noise of the world. This discipline begins with small, ordinary acts that accumulate into inner revolution. Pausing before you respond, breathing before you explain, leaving a discussion before you drown in chaos, turning off your phone without guilt, saying, "Not today," saying, "This doesn't serve me," saying, "No." Every boundary you set is not a wall. It is a gate that determines what is worthy of entering your peace. And here lies one of Jung's most vital truths. You owe no one an explanation for protecting your energy. You do not need to justify your absence or your silence. Those who depended on your endless availability will call this selfishness, but what they are really mourning is the loss of control. When you stop explaining yourself, you withdraw from their emotional script. You step out of the role of the endlessly giving, perpetually understanding one. Jung described this as a stage of sacred isolation, the necessary solitude that precedes individuation. It is not loneliness born of rejection, but an intentional withdrawal into the temple of the self, where you rebuild your identity not from external approval, but from inner alignment. If you want to measure your growth, watch who begins to distance themselves when you stop over-explaining. Notice who grows uncomfortable when you respond with calm instead of reaction. Observe who accuses you of changing when you finally begin to protect your peace. These are not signs of failure. They are proof that liberation has begun. Being unavailable to chaos always exposes those who relied on it to feel significant. You will feel guilty at first. You will doubt yourself. You will hear that you've become distant, that you're different, that you've lost your warmth. But understand, this discomfort is the echo of old conditioning breaking apart. The part of you that once believed love meant self-abandonment is dissolving, and with its fall, your true power rises. Conscious unavailability is not withdrawal from life. It is the foundation of emotional sovereignty. Every no to the world is a deeper yes to your own soul. Every refusal to enter a toxic dynamic is an affirmation that your peace has value. When you stop explaining, the right people begin to understand you through your presence instead of your words. Those who cannot tolerate your silence were never attuned to your essence. They were only tuned to your availability. And when your absence exposes their emptiness, they will react not because you hurt them, but because you stopped serving as their refuge from themselves. The rupture will come, the pain will come, the loneliness will visit. But what you will discover beyond it is not emptiness, it is rebirth. First, there is silence, the kind that feels like a void, heavy and uncertain. You will question your choices, doubt your strength, and miss the noise that once distracted you from your truth. But then, something remarkable happens. The silence begins to soften. It begins to heal. It begins to restore. Solitude becomes not the absence of love, but the presence of your own. The solitude of the strong, the solitude of the one who no longer needs to betray themselves to be accepted. And in that space where confusion once lived, clarity begins to form. Where anxiety once consumed, serenity takes root. What once felt like loss becomes liberation. This is what Jung called the birth of the self, The moment you stop living through the borrowed light of others and start radiating from your own center. You are no longer reacting to the world, you are shaping it from within. The people who fade away reveal they were only drawn to your compliance, not your truth. And though you will lose many, what you gain is beyond measure. Self-respect, inner peace, and a love that no longer requires validation to exist. This is not an ending, it is an awakening. When you stop being available to everything, you become available to what is real. You become rare. You become remembered. You become whole. And that is the quiet magnificence of this journey. So, if you have reached this point, it means a part of you is already ready. Ready to stop chasing connection and start embodying it. Ready to understand that love means nothing if it demands you abandon yourself. Write it now as a declaration of your evolution. I choose my peace, because that is where real power and real love begin. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.